It is said God made the heavens and the earth. When most people think of this, they think of the sky, space, and galaxies as heaven, with the planet we live on being Earth. But let's expand our scope that we're viewing this quote from. What this quote is actually talking about is higher densities or higher dimensions of reality, what we typically refer to as heaven or hell in spiritual traditions. As they constantly refer to the physical world, then that means there must be a non-physical world. And this also calls into question the idea of what we call real and where consciousness exists along that sliding parameter of real, along with the concepts of thoughts and ideas. So the lower material reality is the earth, while the higher dimensions of heaven and hell are the heavens. There's also another famous quote, "As above, so below." Then would it not make sense that we can use our physical reality as a smaller microcosmic expression and look at the rules that govern its function, like the laws of physics and all other quantifiable sciences and fields of study, as a reference or a mirror to better understand the larger macro scale expression that we see in spiritual and religious traditions. That brings us to today's topic, where we will first be looking at the basics of chemical reactions in the periodic table, then dipping our toes into geology by using the planet and its layers as a map to understand how the soul evolves through subsequent lifetimes and the larger cosmological structure. So please do keep in mind that what we're discussing might only appear as analogy, but that is more so a byproduct of higher dimensional concepts fragmenting down into separate expressions. As you descend from higher to lower dimensions, or more accurately densities of reality, time becomes more and more linear, creating this fragmented experience of time and the object-observer phenomenon, and that in higher densities of reality there is no separation between a object, its embodiment and representation. So for example, Apollo or Ra, they are both sun gods or deities or higher scale expressions of consciousness, but there is no difference between them and the sun. If you want to look at it another way, we can look at a Chainsaw Man. It's a manga that came out a few years ago, and there are these beings that are devils. They are the embodiment of fear, whatever they represent. So there's a devil for nuclear warfare. Once that devil was killed, then the world retroactively was altered, in the sense that there was no longer and had never been nuclear warfare, because the devil representing the fear of annihilation through nuclear warfare was killed. So first, let's look at chemistry and how it can be a mirror for the psyche. Now, water has always been used as a symbol for the subconscious. In chemistry, water is what's known as a polar solvent. It has a partially negative charge on the oxygen and a partially positive charge on the two hydrogens. And because of that polarity, water can pull other molecules apart and dissolve them. It's why we use it so much, is that it is almost a universal solvent. The subconscious works in the same way. It draws unprocessed experiences toward itself, breaking it down and breaking apart the emotional structures so that it can be integrated, and we can slowly begin to understand why we have a certain subconscious karmic patterns. In a solution, you have two parts: the solvent, like water, and the solute, which is the thing that is being dissolved. In the psyche, solutes are our experiences, memories, emotional patterns, unconscious impressions, and suppressed trauma. Some dissolve easily, some resist, and some dissolve but never actually transform us in any way. So each type of solute has a psychological equivalence. There are ionic compounds. These are like charged memories that split apart. So let's start with the ionic substances like table salts, sodium chloride, or more intense acids like hydrochloric acid, sulfuric acid, and nitric acid. These are strong electrolytes because they completely dissociate into ions when dissolved. Water gets between these ions and shields their charges. It reduces the force that pulls them back together. This is the dielectric property of water. Psychologically, this is what happens during balanced reflection, meditation, or therapeutic awareness. Our emotional charges, the positive and negative poles, get some space. Like we no longer have an attachment to something. So we are no longer identifying positive good or negative bad experience. We are just looking at it objectively. So this is like they stop collapsing into each other and are able to be separated into understandable parts. These are experiences that can be integrated fully and contribute to the clarity of self-understanding. And these are usually insights that come relatively easily once we're ready for them. Next are weak electrolytes, which represent repressed or half-integrated emotions. This would be things like acetic acid. It's the main acid in vinegar, and acetic acid dissolves in water, but it doesn't fully disassociate. Only a small portion splits into ions. The rest actually stay stuck together. This represents emotions or memories that we are partially aware of, but have not fully taken into awareness, and we're not fully ready to break apart. We can feel this tension, but the separation itself isn't happening, and the integration is happening at a slower rate in small amounts. Next are non-polar solutes. This would be like trauma that resists integration. This would be non-polar substances like oil. No matter what you do, it's not going to dissolve just with water. It's not going to break apart. These would be things like deep trauma patterns or survival adaptations or rigid identities that form our egoic concept of self. So to dissolve oil, you need a surfactant. This is like soap, something that has a polar end and a non-polar end. Psychologically, this looks like a good therapist or somatic processing or consistent self-awareness. Now, in a symbolic framework, this can look like the conscious and subconscious working in tandem. helping to break down the trauma into small enough pieces for integration to actually happen. Now there are also things known as non-electrolytes. These are substances that dissolve but don't transform and actually muddy the solution. These would be things like sugar or alcohol. They dissolve in water but don't turn into ions, so they don't conduct electricity. They actually cloud the solution and don't bring clarity. So psychologically, these are experiences, habits, addictive patterns, or substances that we're using as coping mechanisms that dissolve our inner world of understanding and don't help us evolve. They can fog our intuition and dull our bodily perceptions, and they take up space without helping us to integrate anything. And conductivity, in this sense, is your level of integration and awareness. A solution conducts electricity when charged particles can move freely. So a high conductivity means ions, and a greater clarity would be a lot of processed subconscious material. While lower conductivity means suppressed subconscious patterns, unresolved trauma, and a restricted flow of intuitive information. So when we have things like clair senses, this just means that we are a better conductor of higher density, higher dimensional information that operates within a space-time that is not able to be observed from our linear perception of time, essentially. This is how you get things like future sights, or how people can pick up on smells or hear things that aren't fully there. Next is dilution. This is the balance between the ego and insight. It is crucial. So when you add more water to a solution, you are reducing the concentration of the solute. And in the psyche, this matches how we need to regulate the intensity of transformative experiences. So if a substance or an experience is too concentrated, it will actually overwhelm our nervous system and dissolves our ego too fast. This is what happens when we have concentrated psychedelic experiences, where we have a rapid influx of information that we're processing just as a psychedelic experience, but we don't have the grounding necessary to actually integrate any of it into full-on awareness or learn the lesson. And we might be missing insight that we're not ready to process. So if the solution is too dilute or too weak, then nothing can actually change. So this is like knowledge without embodiments, where we need to balance everything. The process of dilution is making sure the ego stays intact enough to translate insight into our daily lives. This is the point of slow integration through the process of meditation, and it's why it says to not ingest mind-altering substances in spiritual traditions, is because you need that grounding and context to actually process the information, along with the concept of divine timing. So if there's something that you need to learn, someone will come into your life to mirror it back to you. But if you take a drug and gain some level of insight, then that means that you are then seeking knowledge outside yourself, resulting in sin, missing the mark, lack of self-understanding. And that means that because the universe operates on the principle of least action and conserving as much energy as possible, from a higher perspective, that would mean, okay, now this person that was meant to show you something is now going to be rerouted in one way because you gained some sort of insight. And it has a knock-on effect, like a knock-on butterfly effect. So now let's look at the periodic table of elements and how the repeating patterns mirror the cyclical movement of consciousness itself across multiple lifetimes. So just as how there are the noble gases that embody completion with their full valence shells. The valence shell is just the outermost shell. They are non-reactive. Consciousness too has stages of reactivity, integration, and eventually transcendence. So each cycle of the 7 elements with the 8th noble gas reflects the journey of the chakras, the energetic centers of different aspects of the psyche existing in the body's nervous system, eventually culminating in a higher octave or higher frequency of awareness. The table then is not just the periodic table of elements, but a kind of fractal map of the psyche, of karma and spiritual evolution. The repetition of properties with every 7, with the noble gases as the 8th, mirrors the 7 chakras and the higher octave. And then there's the octet rule, which is a direct reflection of the layered energetic centers of the human form. And then there's the idea of the increasing of atomic mass. This corresponds to greater karmic weights or subconscious patterns or density. It is a heavier burden on the soul of unintegrated energy. This creates less flowing reactions. So just as the individual is weighed down by unresolved karma or patterns and struggles to move along their path of least action or going with the flow. So there are first alkali metals. We're going to start at the left end of the periodic table and go towards the right. So first there are alkali metals. These are highly reactive, malleable, ductile, and conductive. So there's one loosely bound valent electron, which is unstable and volatile. These actually must be extracted from compounds due to their reactivity. They can't exist on their own. So this mirrors the early stages of awakening and consciousness, where it's raw, volatile, and a strong personality that reacts explosively to new experiences, emotions, spiritual encounters, or differences in opinion. So just as alkali metals cannot exist freely without reacting, a person in this state usually needs to seek constant external engagement or stimuli to keep processing of information. It's a stage fully devoted to learning experiences. Then there are alkaline earth metals, which is like the stabilization of the self. So there are, starting off, 2 valence electrons with a lower reactivity and a smaller radius, readily forming stable divalent cations. So this stage represents early stabilization, or the beginning of a sense of self that's coming together. and is less prone to instant reaction, but still dependent on external conditions for balance. Then there are transition metals. This is the inner alchemy stage. So relatively unreactive, malleable, and highly conductive, and they exhibit multiple oxidation states, including things like gold, iron, nickel, and platinum. So these metals mirror the Jungian process of inner alchemy, with a stronger, enduring, and more adaptable. And these transition metals correspond to individuals who are forging their character through inner work, with the malleability representing the ability to take many forms without losing integrity, while their conductivity symbolizes the flow of energy and information through a matured psyche. Also, I should mention now at this point, probably should have mentioned it in the beginning, but each person's psyche, we're all at different stages, so no one is going to fit into just one part or one group in the periodic table. Each part of our psyche will be at different stages of evolution. So next are halogens, which is what happens when we begin to seek completion. These have 7 valence electrons in the outermost shell, so they're highly reactive but have a low ionization energy, forming negative ions when paired with things like alkali or alkaline earth metals. So halogens embody the seeker archetype, where we're nearly whole, yet we're looking for that missing puzzle piece externally, where we are searching for completion, be it in relationships, achievements, or spiritual teachers, when really the last missing element is within us. Next are metals, metalloids, and non-metals. So these are things like adaptability and rigidity. So metals are solid, strong, conductive, adaptable, while metalloids are dual in nature, possessing traits of both metals and non-metals, while non-metals themselves are brittle, easily fragmented, highly reactive. Now, metals represent stability and endurance. Metalloids symbolize those living between identities, where we're in a kind of transition phase, adopting characteristics from others, and non-metals mirror rigidity of self-image, where brittleness prevents adaptation unless catalyzed by usually external intervention, what we would call divine intervention, where you just happen to meet someone who says something to bring a sudden burst of insight, or a mentor or a teacher. So mercury itself actually stands out as a liquid at room temperature. This is symbolizing the adaptability of communication. It's fluid, reflective, and transformative. Next are lanthanids and actinids. So these would be higher density or higher dimensional beings. So they're silvery, reactive, and largely hidden in the periodic table, and they tarnish easily, so they act as strong reducing agents. And then there's actinids. So these are dense radioactive elements combining directly with non-metals. These elements mirror higher density or higher dimensional beings. Tarnishing represents their incompatibility with the material world, while their reactivity and reducing power symbolize their role as catalysts, helping lower scale, lower fractal expressions of consciousness, us, integrate subconscious patterns. Their density reflects the immense energetic presence that these embodied archetypes and deities exist in across traditions. Noble gases represent enlightenment, or complete valence shells, non-reactive, and stable. So low boiling points, they exist as light gases. So they don't seek bonds, but are naturally attracting attention. The noble gases are the mirror of enlightenment, self-contained, complete, and unshaken by external conditions. Their lightness reflects consciousness freed from karmic mass, rising into higher octaves of awareness. The teachers and sages mirror their noble quality, radiating presence without needing to seek students who are naturally drawn to them. The psychological equivalents of things like the external elemental properties like oxidation and tarnishing would be things like thoughts exposed to material reality. And reactivity is a readiness to change in response to outside influence. And conductivity is the flow of energy and the channeling of knowledge. Ionization is the ease of shifting identity or states of awareness. And malleability is the adaptability or openness to integrating new perspectives. While the boiling and melting points are thresholds of stress required for transformation. And then things like the atomic radius is the sphere of influence or the field of awareness that the person has. While things like electronegativity are the inward pull, the gravitational attraction of the psyche. And electropositivity is the external influence or the seeking of completion reflected through others. With the periodic table is not just a chemical chart, but a fractal diagram of consciousness. Its periodicity mirrors the chakras and the stages of karmic integration and levels of awareness. So lastly, let's look at the earth and its subsequent parts, like the crust, the upper and lower mantles, and the inner and outer core, and how these components can be used to view higher, more unified states of existence. Now think of Source, God, the divine, as the core of creation, like the center of an onion, with everything else emanating from it as you go out further and further from layer to layer, with space-time itself getting less and less dense, resulting in a more linear perception of time. So as you get closer and closer, everything is happening all at once. And your soul goes to whichever layer or density of reality based on its level of understanding, as the concept of inside and outside, or internal and external, is slowly broken down. So first is the crust, which is made up of giant slabs called tectonic or continental plates, like giant puzzle pieces constantly bumping into each other over floating on the surface of like water, except in this case it's not water, it's highly dense molten magma. And there's the process of subduction that pulls denser oceanic crust down into the mantle, into the upper mantle to be recycled, whereas the process of abduction forces buoyant crust upward over the continental crust. To draw parallels to how this works in metaphysics, you can view the crust as our physical reality, or the surface of the crust is our physical, our conscious awareness of physical reality, with the shifting plates as information that is either arising and taking form or being subsumed back into the collective unconscious or higher density reality, with things like the resulting earthquakes that are caused by these shifts as shifts in collective thought, and volcanic eruptions as sudden pieces of information erupting from the collective unconscious into conscious awareness. And then there's the mantle. The mantle is made up of molten magma, getting hotter and denser the deeper you go. So just like how hot air rises and cold air descends, this also happens in the mantle, creating convection currents, rising and falling, allowing for material to be recycled as it goes from the crust down into the mantle and eventually transformed into denser magma. So at first, the upper mantle, the rocks kind of maintain their structure, but as you descend, the heat and pressure increase, changing the makeup of the rocks. This mirrors the process of the soul ascending to higher and higher levels of conscious awareness as the increase from the subconscious the subconscious increases the pressure. And we see this reflected in the external environments. So we are going from one density to the next. Again, this was shown in Snell's Law on my social media page on TikTok, but also I've covered it in previous episodes of the podcast. So at a certain point, specifically 660-ish kilometers down, you reach a transition zone to the lower mantle where the rocks become even denser. And this can be viewed as one of the barriers or the veils seen in Kabbalistic traditions, where there are multiple veils separating certain regions of the layers of heaven. So there's also the core, which we can divide into two separate parts. This was first theorized in 1936 by a female seismologist, Inga Lyman, where she noticed that seismic waves caused by an earthquake off the coast of New Zealand seemed to bounce off the center. So she proposed that the outer core was more liquidy, while the inner core is more solid, with some scientists theorizing there's a kind of innermost inner core that might exist. And this constant churning of nickel and iron from the core is what generates the Earth's electromagnetic field. And again, this transition from the mantle to the core to the theorized innermost inner core is very succinct with different spiritual traditions of different layers of heaven or the divine being behind certain barriers, not just in the sense of ethical, like you have to be a super pure soul to get there, but also in terms of like energy barriers. So you have to have a certain level of energetic embodiment to get past this barrier to reach a certain layer of heaven. So the electromagnetic field that is generated by the Earth's core forms the magnetosphere, which is what protects the Earth from solar radiation and storms. The psychological parallel to this is the process of non-attachment or surrender to God or the divine. It is acting as a type of shield where we're not letting external things influence us or knock us off course. You know, the story in the Bible of Jesus telling his apostles, hey, focus on me. With these solar storms being how we subconsciously project onto other people, with the shield of the magnetosphere being the non-attachment or surrender to the divine or God, or the non-attachment seen in Buddhism. Anyways, that was all I was covering for this episode. I hope you found it interesting. If you liked it, leave a like, a message. If you want to contact me, I got an email. It's thumbnicholas322@gmail.com. That's thumb without the B, all lowercase. And if you want to help support the show, I have a link to Patreon that I will hopefully put in this description if I can get it up and running. And if you did, I would greatly appreciate it, as I'm currently homeless. So that would very much be, appreciated. Anyways, I will catch you in the next episode. Bye-bye.